Bring the airplane in.
All right, our regularly scheduled special meeting of October 12th is in session. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as submitted. With council's indulgence, I'd like to speak a second about political signs. Political signs are not allowed on public right-of-way. In our city, unlike some sister cities, we don't rely on campaign managers to pick up political signs on right-of-way.
Thank you.
Charlie Bloston does that, and he is completely non-denominational. He picks up Republicans, Dems, Libertarians, Lutherans, Episcopals, everybody's signs. And they're usually picked up within 24 hours. So putting signs on the public right-of-way is basically just a waste of money because they go away in a very short period of time. Now, we don't split hairs on where the public right-of-way is because sometimes that's difficult to determine, but if you're obviously on the public right-of-way, it's going to be gone by the next day. So don't waste your money. Don't put the signs up.
And they're not returned.
No, they're crushed and then sent to Mars, I think. So that brings us to 1A, is our proposed land trade discussion and intersection design.
Council, let me lead off with some introductory comments as kind of what we're doing here tonight and kind of give you some background, and then I'll introduce our guest. I don't know how many of you know Steve Anderson. Steve, you got to just wave your hand. If you haven't had a chance to meet Steve, Steve's an attorney and purchased what we call the old sheriff's site from Arapahoe County. This is where the Arapahoe County Sheriff and also the district attorney there were there for years and years and years. And when the county moved all of their facilities out to the new Justice Center, they put that property up for sale. Steve, you bought that how many years ago?
I need the mic. I better get it. Sorry, Jim. I acquired it in 2003. I think it was about December 1st or 3rd, something like that.
2003, so you've owned it around 7 years.
Correct.
7 years now. Steve bought the property, completely renovated. As most of you know, there's 2 buildings there. Bought the buildings, completely renovated them, moved his own law offices over. I think you were in Cherry Creek at that time. I don't remember
Correct.
for sure. Moved his own offices over from Cherry Creek to Littleton, and then the rest of it he has leased as office property as an investment. So he's had a presence there at 2100 Littleton Boulevard since 2003. There was 2 or 3 years ago, he had been approached by some people that were interested in perhaps redeveloping the property. There was quite a bit of discussion out in the community. Dennis, I don't believe Dennis, I don't see Dennis now, but anyway, he's out. I don't think it ever. I know this. There was a lot of talk in the community. It never actually came before the city council. I don't remember if it made it to the planning commission or not. But
I don't think it was submitted to either, Jim.
yeah, so I don't. There was some discussion, but to the best of my knowledge, there was never a formal submittal. So there was never any real critique through the city. At that time, the economy was really kind of going soft, and those people decided not to pursue that. In the intervening time, I guess, I don't know, several months, maybe a year ago, Steve retained the services of Al Clusi. 2 years ago now, Al is a principal with the architectural planning firm of Clip Clusi. They do a lot of architectural planning and urban design work around the metro area, and so Steve retained Al's services to really take a fresh look at his property and kind of give him some professional guidance. What should be the future? What should be the vision of that property down in the future as under Steve's ownership? So Steve had come in. They had been visiting with the staff, the planning and development staff, about a number of kind of technical issues having to do with. Phil, would you mind getting that door so we don't get the? Thank you. They had been come in to just do some what I'll call scoping sessions with the planning team, the engineering team, just looking at Al doing his assessment of the property, what would be some things that could enhance that property and kind of put a little more of a vision, a future vision to it. So we've been involved in some technical discussions, primarily having to do with access to the property, and that the proximity of the property with the courthouse across the street, and perhaps an intersection there, and kind of looking at a traffic pedestrian analysis of that property as it sits on Littleton Boulevard, and then with Spotswood. And as those of you who have traversed that, even today as it sits, it's a rather awkward movement, both for automobiles trying to come out of that neighborhood to the east, trying to get onto Littleton Boulevard, and over the years with the light rail, as we've had an increase in volume of pedestrian traffic coming up from the light rail system along Littleton Boulevard. So we'd been having some technical discussions, informal technical discussions with Mr. Clusi and Mr. Anderson. And then several months ago, when the idea of the City Ditch Trail came forward, and Charlie Bloston advanced that, and it kind of picked up some steam. Some of the discussion with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Clusi, because Charlie had actually made a contact with Mr. Anderson, showing the City Ditch Trail, and that the master plan, as it was planned, contemplated crossing Mr. Anderson's property to connect to Littleton Boulevard and then go on to the north. So what the discussion that occurred then was with Mr. Anderson looking at that, saying, you know, the City Ditch Trail, he felt, had some congruence with some of the concepts that Mr. Clusi had been talking about in terms of how to enhance the property. And so there was some discussion about not only the intersection, but was there a possible land trade that might be of benefit both to Mr. Anderson as a property owner and to the community in terms of not only the City Ditch Trail, but also as it was become more apparent that if we were going to have increased pedestrian bike traffic on the City Ditch Trail, the safe access going north to get across Littleton Boulevard was going to be a challenge. And I think in his preliminary comments to you, Charlie had indicated that there were still some pretty significant design issues to be worked out. Council's also aware of some other land acquisition issues that we have to the north of Littleton Boulevard. So I think Council knows that there are some challenges there. But given that congruence of possible benefits to both Mr. Anderson and his professional help in terms of the future of his property and possible benefits to the community also, we felt like it would be productive to have Mr. Anderson and Mr. Clusi present some of their concepts to you tonight. Obviously, any kind of actual negotiations between the city and Mr. Anderson would be done in a confidential manner, as all real estate matters are handled. But what we wanted to do tonight was to give all 7 of the City Council an idea of some of the planning and land development and transportation concepts that Mr. Anderson and Mr. Clusi had been discussing with the staff. So it's really a background briefing so that you have a better idea of the landowners, some of his vision and his professional team's vision of the property. Any questions that you have, we're just very, very obviously early in the whole City Ditch master planning process, so we're not looking for any specific direction tonight. We're not asking council to make any kind of definite decision. This is really sort of background, give you a chance to ask any questions of Mr. Anderson, Mr. Clusi, and then obviously staff hopes to continue with the master planning of the City Ditch Trail. So I think with that, unless council has any absolute upfront questions, I'll turn it over to Steve for introductions, and I think Mr. Clusi is going to probably present the bulk of the presentation. So, Mayor, is that okay to proceed on that basis? Okay? All right. So, Steve, I don't know if you have introductory comments or anything you want to add to my introduction, or otherwise it's the floor is yours.
Jim, thank you very much. I really can't add much to that. Al probably can add considerable to that in terms of his work and what he's done so far and how he's discussed things with the city. There's a question.
Can you come up front so we can see him?
Or
Sure.
you can sit over here.
Or over here?
I mean, we've got a mic over here, too,
Yeah, Steve, they'd like to have you come to the table.
Sure, glad to.
figuratively as well as physically.
How's this? Good spot?
You can just use one of these mics.
And we got 3 cops on your back there, Steve, so you're safe.
Don't make any quick movements.
I'll turn this one off. All right. As I said, Jim, thank you very much. I don't have any comments to add other than introducing Al Calusi. Al and I met approximately 2 years ago. I can share with you that I have never accomplished any development plans for the site. And tonight, as we sit here, we have absolutely no development plans for the site. I can't tell you. We have looked at multiple schemes. There have been a host of different architects that I have hired, consulted with, and attempted to gain greater understanding of what best fits for the city of Littleton. Ultimately, however, I ended up hiring Al and staying with Al because I liked the way he thought, I liked the way he approached things, and I believe that's probably a good starting point, Al, perhaps for you this evening, because he did approach things with me in a very different manner than everyone else I had talked to. His initial comment to me was, Steve, before you start to think about what should go on the site, perhaps you should consider some of the circumstances of the site and what fits in with the city. And I believe as we were talking about those kinds of things, the idea of the city ditch has surfaced and sort of coincided with our discussions at the time about circumstances around the site and what should happen to it. So with that, Al, if you wouldn't mind kind of going forward, I'd appreciate it.
And I think if Al can work with the portable mic.
Sure.
So
I think he's wired already, Jim.
I'm
Thank
wired.
you.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm wired.
Okay.
Hopefully everybody can hear me overall. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. And it's in many cases when we make certain presentations to planning commissions and or city council, it's more in terms of a formal hearing. And one thing that we were able to do earlier this summer is to have a very similar informal discussion with planning commission in this very room, talking about some of the ideas that we had in terms of mostly context of the neighborhood. And like Steve said a little bit before, is that what we have found many times before you can start to think about anything, you've really got to understand it from a much higher altitude. Now, Steve and I have lamented over the course of our 2-year working relationship about, I remember back in 1970, 72, what Main Street was all about, and we've compared notes on that. So it's interesting to finally be able to have an opportunity to, one, represent interest as a local here that's grown up and has practiced here, to be able to see the development of Littleton in terms of continually becoming a way cool place. And I know that maybe isn't a technical term, but it's one that I really like to use, and I think people get it in terms of the qualities of Littleton, which are unique to no other place in the country. Now, in terms of my profession and with what I do, I'm always looking at projects, mixed-use projects, infill projects, new development projects all the time, because in essence, I guess you could say I have a passion for that sort of thing. So the nice thing in terms of when Steve called me and we were able to sit down and talk a little bit about something, yet I knew this site very, very well in terms of been by here many times, growing up in this area, and that sort of thing. And so to finally to be able to come and take a look at the site, but all of a sudden what I thought I knew, I wanted to make sure that I really knew. So one thing that we had the opportunity to do, and my relationship with like Kent Begley and Tom Christopite go way, way back, and I've met them through the course of the work that I do, is I've had the opportunity to sit in on a lot of what I call the community meetings. And those community meetings, whether it's the pub meetings over the previous years or the True Grit sessions, I really find out that each and every time that I go to those, that I learn more and more of what I thought I knew about Littleton, but I have a more enriched experience.
Now, if I leave that for a moment, and I go over in terms of a lot of the planning work, and when I listen to, in essence, the debate or discussion between various presenters and council, a lot of time council really wants to say, we want to understand better of a project in terms of what is the impact. We all know what the pre-existing conditions are now, but if, in fact, if you propose something different, regardless of the zoning, regardless of the vision, what is the impact in terms of the way we live now and the quality of our life? So many times when we meet with Charlie and that sort of thing, we go through issues, we talk about technical issues in terms of what is traffic, what are in terms of sequencing, what are utilities, what is the positive and negative impacts on the neighborhood group. So in all cases, I have learned over the course of my profession in terms of that you really want to solve from the big picture first, because regardless of the coolness of a plan that you might come up with, if you don't solve for the bigger picture, then in essence, nobody can support it. And I wouldn't expect you all, in terms of being the representatives of your various community, to do that in any way, shape, or form. So the discussion that we've had in terms of with Steve first, and then going very closely and spending a lot of time with Charlie, and I enjoy Charlie's sessions. They are always enlightening for me, as well as with Dennis. I've grown to know those two professionals over there very, very well over the last several years, and I respect those gentlemen. They are committed to their to the city as far as what they do. And every Christmas, when I look at the Christmas lights, I know that Charlie has had his hand on Main Street. A way cool thing. So very simple tonight. All I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about, one, the handouts that you have in front of you, and that's what these two boards are. And I'll just put these up here briefly. Because what has evolved in terms of what I'd call the visioning or ideas as far as what could happen on Steve's particular site, and for the benefit of all of you, it's a little, Steve's property basically is everything that you see shaded here in the slightly yellow color all the way over to the depression for the Burlington Northern property. The interesting thing about this is that because it has grown over time with the one-way conditions of Main Street as well as with Alamo in terms of how everything handles here, I find myself, when I come into town many times, checking my speedometer because I realize I'm probably about 5 to 10 miles faster than I should be when the flashing light says speed limit of, I hesitate to say this, is it 25 miles an hour? Thank you. But the idea in terms of how Littleton Boulevard is being used as a whole. During the course of this project, I've also done a lot of reading in terms of the material. So, for example, the Littleton Corridor Study that was performed back in the, early 80s, thereabouts? Something like that, maybe late 90s. Dick Farley is another gentleman that I have a high respect for, and we've collaborated on projects before and worked together, and I know he has had his hand on a variety of studies for the city. So when I read that in terms of one of the comments that he made, and that is Littleton Boulevard should become a great street or boulevard in the metro area. Much like we think about 17th Avenue or 6th Avenue or some of those other great streets, why shouldn't Littleton be the same way? But one of the challenges is in terms of, one, we have a wonderful jewel here that comprises City Hall that basically is the bookend to the Carnegie Library at the other end, the melting pot. And on top of that, a few years ago, Barker Rinker Seacat Architects put together a wonderful project called the Buck Center. The cool thing about all of this is that it's very close to downtown, but one of the challenges is crossing the street. Every time I leave Steve's office, and Steve's office is located up in the corner of this building here, I do more than a couple of takes in terms of right, left to make sure that the traffic that typically it gains speed as it starts to leave this last signal and heads uphill here starts to generate a lot of speed. So even though that there is a designated crosswalk here, it still is, I don't get any warm fuzzies when I go to cross it, and I would view it or classify it as actually a dangerous condition. So I start to think about that when it comes to Steve's property and or anything else that might happen here in terms of just the quality of experience for the existing neighborhood, let alone anything that might happen in the future, whether that's commercial or residential or whatever. I also look in terms of exploring and have walked this many times in terms of I didn't realize that the Rose Garden existed here. So when I go through and now I see that and experience of what's going on there and the qualities of that with Stern Park are also great assets that in terms of anything that would happen on Steve's property, that in essence we make sure that we take that into consideration in any and all times. Now granted, there's also the very successful in terms of RTD condition. And just as a side note, when I first started working with Steve, I was out on his property a Sunday before the Democratic National Convention, and I was walking in the weeds, and I noticed two policemen on bicycles down there at the station, and I waved down to them just to say hello, Sunday afternoon. Next thing I know, I look up and I find numerous Littleton police officers asking what was I doing on the property. because they were concerned that I might be scoping the light rail station prior to the Democratic National Convention. So I find myself in a very funny situation, and I think actually the officer back, you look very familiar to me. So in essence, now maybe he can believe my story as far as why I was out there and what I was doing. But I had a nice visit with these gentlemen, and so
He's here for a reason tonight.
yes, he's further checking up on me. So all in all, in terms of the interesting thing about the planning process is, as a result of this, in terms of working with Dennis and Charlie and others, is that the whole idea about the linear park piece, whether it's the Littleton Community Trail, as it's been called, or the City Ditch Trail as a whole, but all of a sudden it got my professional blood kind of really pumping and excited with the idea that all of a sudden here's an opportunity that, putting Steve's site aside for a moment, the opportunity for this group and this generation to do something that is truly pretty unique to all of downtown Littleton in terms of for generations to come to put something like this park into this place. And it seemed to be kind of almost a natural fit once the ideas started being discussed, and also witnessing some of Charlie's presentations and the community reaction to that in terms of embracing the idea of this park condition. And so subsequent to that, when I'm traveling, and for example, like this summer in Minneapolis, I've used some of the rail to trail conditions that have happened, and I go out and I check those out. But all in all, this is something that I think that, and this is Charlie's graphic that I put up here, the idea in terms of a 1.5 mile long trail, I just think is just so off the charts. I get excited in terms of I hope that we can all embrace this and find ways to make this happen in some form or fashion. Well, with that, Steve's property just happens to sit in terms of the connection between Phase 1, which is everything north here of Littleton Boulevard, and the rest of it, which is Phase 2. Now, Charlie is fun to watch him in presentations in terms of giving very passionate terms of descriptions as far as why we should be doing this and a call to action. And I agree with him wholeheartedly as far as what's going on. But one of the challenges that we have here that we recognize in terms of with all the great qualities of the linear park, because it allows people by foot to get to downtown Littleton. And I've also sat through several of the Planning Commission discussions where they talk about the comprehensive plan. And I know it's an evolving piece. It's an evolving document. But overall, the fundamental piece, and I think the goal of the comprehensive plan, is to really create a vibrant downtown in terms of people having access there, whether it's by car or by foot. The idea in terms of supporting the businesses there, whether they're historic or whether they're contemporary. But the idea in terms of that we all have a jewel here that is off the charts. And like I said earlier, I travel and see a lot of properties around the country in terms of mixed-use developments. And this one here is just from a rating standpoint, and the quality of it is truly unique. It's truly small scale, and it isn't anything else. It isn't anything that's been imported, but it is truly grown from within. So then I kind of playing all these things back and forth in terms of this wonderful opportunity of the trail, and I could go on for a full hour about the benefits of that. But the idea in terms of then how to stitch this whole thing together and now come full circle back to Steve's property. So then I start thinking a little bit about this piece here as far as one of the issues that Steve has is that his property, it goes all the way to the edge of the depression where the heavy-duty rail lines come through a couple times a day. Where most of the other properties along in here, that the Burlington Northern Santa Fe right-of-way basically is still kept in the railroad ownership. So what I'm trying to do here is to figure out access points in terms of the issues with the great street of Littleton and try to make that a boulevard that it should be. The idea in terms of the neighborhoods to the east to be able to have access to downtown and or the light rail condition. The opportunities to improve the pedestrian access like on Alamo. And Charlie and I have had some great discussions as far as how do you make that a better, more safe condition rather than taking your life in your hands when you cross Alamo. So the idea behind this is in terms of taking the same width that runs basically all the way up and down here in terms of the right-of-way condition and suggesting that in order for the city to be able to have use of this is the idea rather than trying to purchase it from Steve, but the idea in terms of being able to exchange property. So what you see here in terms of the B condition is a parcel that is less square footage than what we have as far as A and a portion of a new, basically public street that would carve through Steve's property. So if I were to approach Steve 2 years ago and basically said, I have an idea for you, is that I want you to give up part of your view properties that are awesome in terms of the views to downtown in terms of development, and I'm suggesting that you give up a portion of your property for a public road to go through your property, I think he would have thrown me out the door. But I think as a result of our discussions with all of this and the evolution as far as this vision and the strength of this vision, I think that there's some great rationale in terms of being able to allow people that live in the area and on Bema Street here to be able to come through Steve's property, come to, as we envision, an intersection right here to be able to turn left to go to downtown. And the idea in terms of greatly improving an unsafe condition in its current condition, let alone future traffic loads. At the same time, allowing in terms of an increased traffic load that runs basically through this linear park, and I've seen other examples of linear parks, and they are very much embraced by the community. So whether I'm on a buggy with my child, in terms of whether I'm walking, whether I'm on a bike, but the idea in terms of any non-motorized travel, that in essence I view that this will become one of the most noteworthy open space additions to any city in Colorado probably for the next decade. I think it is that level as far as a quality piece. I've also sat in terms of some of Nature Land Conservancy presentations to some of the real estate groups in town, and I've approached them afterwards in terms of saying, do you know Charlie Blosson? If you don't, would you please talk with him and get together? Fortunately, Charlie is ahead of me once again in terms of being able to also make connection with them to try to find funding sources. So at the same time now, I'm almost finding myself as far as an open space advocate rather than a professional to Steve in terms of trying to find ways to make the linear park become a reality. I'm very much committed to that, and I just think it's spot on as far as what we should do. But now if I come back to Steve's issue in terms of how does that leave him with any kind of a developable site, the idea came up as a result, and I've had a lot of discussions with Charlie's group on this in terms of the intersection, the expansion in terms of Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the trail, with the idea of taking some of the urban drainage area here, which is basically a mowed field at this point, and the idea of suggesting that there is a land trade. I'm trying to keep this from a very simplistic standpoint, not from a legalese standpoint, but the idea in terms of, hey, if in fact, if the city has the asset in terms of this urban drainage piece here that they're not using, but in essence, if we could get Steve to give up a portion of this, and this is about 42,000 square feet of property that comprises this footprint A, then in essence I can make a win-win situation between public and private sectors. And that seems to be the idea in terms of the crescendo of my whole thought process, and that is Steve in essence has a piece of property that it is trimmed and fine-tuned, so for whatever future development that at least he has a direction. Steve has a lot of options with the current zoning on here, and he could do a variety of things. But I think it's important to suspend those until the idea of what the lay of the land should be in terms of the benefit of the neighborhood, the benefit in terms of the linear park, the access to downtown, and all of these kind of urban design planning pieces that I think all fold together into one package. So for the most part, that's kind of like the frame of reference that I've had coming up to this process to date. And we've had wonderful councils through the DRC sessions with Jim and Charlie and Dennis and others as far as what this should be and how this should go forward. But in essence, as we talk about it more and more, and as we take people out onto the property and we walk the property, people, I think all of a sudden a light bulb goes on in terms of, hey, this does make sense, this is a pretty cool idea. So one thing that I would hope to be able to do during this course of, as a follow-up piece here is basically extend an invitation to everybody in this room to join Steve and I out onto the property here to be able to talk a little bit and walk and understand the dynamic as far as what we've got going on here. With the idea of finally, in fact, if certain grant monies and or public funds are made available through South Suburban or others, that wouldn't it be great to be able to put that towards the trail improvements or to the lighting and or the safety conditions rather than just trying to acquire real estate. So the idea in terms of how dollars are spent by council or others towards any kind of public space improvements, I'd sure rather see trees and landscaping versus the idea of just real estate. So maybe that's a good place for me to basically stop and field questions, the idea, because I really want to hear your thoughts as far as this vision and how we take it forward.
Al, why don't you bring up a chair so you can respond to any questions or comments.
All right.
I can share my mic with you.
Thank you.
So, comments, questions from council? Jim?
On your parcel A there, on the right-hand side of that, there are two dotted lines that are separated. What's the difference between those two dotted lines?
Those two dotted lines represent a 25-foot wide easement that comprises the old City of Inglewood city ditch, which was the irrigation ditch right-of-way that ran through that area before the railroads.
And I'll add to that, today, underground, at the center of that 25-foot easement, if you go to the center, 12.5-foot off-center either way, there is a 4.5-foot concrete pipe in ground that is general water supply to the city of Inglewood.
So it is still, that's still where they're running their flow now?
True.
Through that easement? Okay,
That's
thank
correct.
you.
Bruce?
Al, I appreciate your comments. The integration of parcel A on the linear park makes makes a lot of sense, and I completely understand where you're going, and I understand the connectivity or the connection with respect to the loop. And I was actually over there the other day, and I did walk around a little bit in there, and I know there's a curb cut already that you could use to get in between the two buildings. That part of that already exists. What I'm still a little. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more. What I think I heard you say. I mean, basically, you said the swap is a facilitation or a financing vehicle to conserve money. Open space money to use for purposes of development as opposed to land property acquisition. So it's basically a mechanism to help the city save money to do the development work on the trail, which I think I understand that. I guess from your guys' view conceptually of this B parcel, what broadly, is there anything else that you can help us understand as far as why that particular parcel and that particular configuration makes better sense for this arrangement than something else?
I'll try to.
Okay.
This is a black and white graphic of that same condition that you just described. And the one thing that we have figured out here is that Steve's property basically runs along this line here all the way over to the railroad right-of-way piece. And in terms of what I'd call making a meaningful connection between Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the linear park so that it doesn't neck down too much, in essence, because I view that this is one of the busiest conditions of the park because, in essence, it draws from both the north and south to get across the railroad to one of the few conditions to get to downtown. So I view that the traffic loads here will be pretty strong. So the idea in terms of the width of this is that what we wanted to try to do is to create a situation to where we pulled it back far enough so that any kind of series of trail configurations could exist through there, that there is some grade drop-off, and we have done some studies. We postponed some studies from some earlier development options that we had across there. But the idea of then this piece of property here was as primarily a result, and that is you see that there's a 100-year flood plan. In essence, we've checked the FEMA maps that run through all of Little's Creek that run all the way down there in terms of trying to understand in terms of what the current conditions are as well as the worst-case scenario with the 100-year flood line. And what we did is that in terms of trying to create a balanced condition so that Steve there's an appropriate balance between what Steve might be giving up and in terms of what he might be getting in return, so that there's a balance between that, is the idea that it's basically the configuration. Steve does not own these two residential properties that are right here. So in essence, we took from that south property line, pulled it back 10 feet from the 100-year flood plan, and in essence, this is one of the two parcel lines between parcels that the city owns. They own both north of that line as well as south of that line. So basically, it was an accumulation in terms of square footage back from the 100-year flood plan and basically hitting one of the parcel lines that determined that. Now, all of the property that's over in this shaded area here slopes to the south and to the west. This property here slopes to the west. So in essence, the conditions here is that if I had any future development, I don't get the views from this piece of property that I do here. But what I am able to do, in essence, is that I think that Stern Park and this condition on Bemis Street here is under-celebrated, meaning in terms of this is one of the most delightful city parks anywhere in town. I mean, literally in the metro area. So the idea in terms of, is this quality space? I view that this is kind of like foreground experience. This is front range experience. So in essence, what that would cause Steve to do, in essence, is to back up his front range experience of the property and have more in terms of a local neighborhood experience here. So there's two different kind of approaches depending on the property, but I think that both are value in terms of how you might eventually develop those. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it helps. I think it helps. I guess let me ask you sort of a follow-on then. I mean, say for the sake of an argument, it was two separate transactions. Say that at this point in time, the city wanted to purchase parcel A straight away for cash and didn't want to engage in the parcel B transaction. Does that negate, I mean, is there any reason you guys wouldn't do one or the other? You wouldn't, I understand sort of I think I understand the desirability of what you're talking about, because I think from an accounting standpoint, you're going to get, you don't have to recognize a gain on the sale if there is one. You would have paid taxes. You could just roll your basis over to the other piece of property, which is all fine. Does the property swap arrangement preclude a single transaction for just parcel A, out of curiosity?
Well, if I can make a comment to that, and maybe Steve follows up with it, what I'd like to explain to the group, and that is that I think that there is three all converging issues that should be addressed at one point in time with this. One is in terms of obviously the park space. To me, that's kind of a no-brainer. Two, the idea of a safe intersection to be able to get from one side of Littleton Boulevard to the other. And three is to be able to get people from Bemis Street to be able to literally close down the median here and to be able to go through the property to be able to get out there. So, for example, if we're able to identify those three issues, then finally Steve has a roadmap about what direction is he going to take in terms of the property. Because right now, he's literally stalled in terms of being able to think about anything other than just cutting the grass and putting up for lease signs, because all of those things dramatically affect as far as his ability to understand. Like Al, start drawing, I go, well, where do I start? Because I don't know where the footprint of this property is. So the idea in terms of, in all due respect, if I tried to isolate that and didn't address this condition or this condition or this condition, I would basically then have to have a very meaningful presentation in front of Planning Commission and Council as far as, oh, we've solved that and we've figured that whole thing out. But I'm really kind of like handicapping myself from a design standpoint because these are so much in flux.
Let's say for the sake of an argument that those issues were resolved collectively.
Okay.
Then broader vision, or in your words, your roadmap, where does your roadmap lead? What is some of the visioning for the property, assuming that these building blocks are in place and get you to the point where you can do what you're talking about?
As far as how I would advance the design of the property then?
Yeah.
Well, in every and all cases, that what I try to do with assignments like this is look beyond current real estate cycles, because some of the activities and actions that I'll take in terms of designing this will last generations and well beyond my lifetime. So it's important to think beyond just current real estate cycles. So I think a little bit about the needs of the community, the idea of what's appropriate from addition to the community in terms of obviously issues in terms of residential, quality residential, a variety of residential types, as well as commercial. What's the right amount of commercial? What's the vibrancy of the current commercial, and do you try to dilute that? So in essence, I would take that kind of acid test from a design standpoint in terms of, Steve, these are your options, and these are my recommendations as far as taking the vision statements that I've heard from planning and listening to a lot of discussion and trying to formulate some kind of a concept of what this property might be. Does he keep these two buildings? Does he take them down? I don't know at this point in time, but what I want to be able to do is to provide my client a lot of good options as far as you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. Because in essence, he can make better choices than if he has those options.
Okay. Thanks.
Was that a yes or no?
To
The question of, are you willing to sell parcel A?
I might pass the mic over to Steve to answer that question.
Interesting question, and I can't tell you that I've really deliberated on it very long. It's been presented to me in passing. I've given thought to it in very short order because I really have no interest in selling it as a separate parcel. It's far too valuable to me. There is some beautiful real estate that we could put there. In fact, we've got some drawings and things that we've mapped out already, and it's just too great of a sacrifice for me to sell it. It interferes, I think, to some extent. Well, in effect, if I were to just sell that, it takes out of play over an acre of land on my site. It's not a very large site to start with. So, I mean,
But we're not looking
let
for
me back up. Anything's for sale at the right price. If you got an idea in mind that you're thinking about paying, I can tell you, public record reflects that I sold that piece as part of the larger parcel for a little over $1,250,000 a couple of years ago.
But we're not doing a linear perk. We're doing a city ditch trail, a trail that goes along the side of the ditch. We don't need parcel A. All we need is a trail that goes down somewhere between the east and the west side of parcel A. I mean, you guys are the ones that came up with the linear ditch concept. So how wide is a trail, Charlie? 10 feet. So what we're really looking at is 10 feet, somewhere within your, what's that, 12-foot easement?
Yeah, you have to understand, though, if I were to sell 12 feet within that easement, for example, that takes out of play for me everything from there to the west of the property.
Except you can't build anything on top of the easement.
I don't need to build on top of the easement to development, though. In fact, we can show you, Al, there's a paper over there. We've kind of mapped it out. We can build in between the easement and the west side of the property.
And if you do, then more power to you. But you can't build anything on top of the easement. What we're looking for is 10 of the 12-foot width that's on top of the easement that you can't build on.
Right, but
Not
I
an
think
acre's worth of...
Yeah, I mean, I can shortcut this. I wouldn't sell that,
Okay,
if that helps.
all right.
You're saying you want to move the road 150 feet, come in between those two buildings that are existent now, and then make an intersection at that point, so you've got two intersection within 150 feet. That's pretty difficult to do on that hillside coming down, especially during the winter, or for our emergency vehicles going up. You know, they've got to get to moving up that hill.
I understand your question and respect it. I think it's a good one. It's one that I raised. We have spent a great deal of time talking with Charlie and others, and I think both from a traffic and an engineering perspective, at least staff has agreed and said that this works fine. It's workable. So, you know, I'm not a traffic engineer, I guess.
We'll bring Charlie to the table to respond more directly to Mr. Trujillo.
The Bemis Street intersection would become a right-out only. And the full movement intersection at the realigned location that would access Mr. Anderson's property would be a four-way intersection for left turns in all directions. But the current location of Bemis Street would only allow people from the south to turn east on Littleton Boulevard, but that would be all. They could not turn left to go westbound into downtown Littleton without going through the Anderson property to get there. And that would be a public right-of-way.
What would be the width of the street there?
Well,
It wouldn't fit between those two buildings. You know, if you're thinking about,
it would be a street without parking. And so you could put 2 lanes on that street and then widen it out at the Littleton Boulevard location, flare it out, as we call it, to provide for proper turning movements. There is enough room there, Joe, to put a lane in each direction, a sidewalk, but we could not have any parking.
We have done layout studies both with our engineers and reviewed those with Charlie and Craig Fessler as far as alternate locations for intersections. But in essence, they can run anywhere from directly between the two buildings, and it does fit, all the way down further. So in essence, the city and Steve all has options as far as where that intersection occurs. So we've done test cases as far as handicapped ADA accessibility to the courthouse, as well as the idea of the buses coming from Littleton Public Schools to be able to now turn out leftbound where they're not able to do now, as well as the idea of closing the median at Bemis Street here. So in essence, all that traffic would then go through here and then can turn left, or this would, like Charlie said, in terms of just be a right-out only. So I've tried to think about the various scenarios. In essence, what we're presenting up here has the blessing of my civil engineers as well as our own efforts in terms of trying to figure out the various scenarios for those intersections. It's not just one solution, but I think you have multiple solutions.
Let me tell you, from the response we did with Craig Fessler on this analysis, the location at opposite Court Place, where it would cut through the Anderson property, it does work from a synchronization standpoint of phasing the traffic signals on Alamo, Littleton Boulevard, and Main Street. So it is an appropriate location to do it. If council decides that they want to put an intersection in there, we can put a full traffic light and coordinate it with all the other lights in the corridor. That position does work. There's actually a window. We can slide it a little bit east or west, not a whole lot, but just enough to accommodate the traffic coming from the north at Court Place that would like to turn east onto Littleton Boulevard.
Other council questions?
No, I have
Yes, ma'am.
some comments. I walk that crosswalk that you find so exciting quite often, and I have never, ever had anybody come close to hitting me. I have almost been hit more than once at some red lights where I had the right of way to cross, and at some stop signs. But that's my experience. So I'm just saying there are different experiences there.
And
But you know, so just that part. Part of my concern about a swap is the potential impact on the open space, the drainage area.
okay.
That, from my perspective, and again, I go past there an awful lot, and that I walk and jog around Stern Park usually several times a week and come back up, go round and round. I see the traffic and so forth. On weekends, I see the kind of use that people make in Stern Park, the main part now, and also in the Rose Garden and so forth. If we do get a trail, I can see a lot more need for more use in the drainage, the floodplain, and so forth. And if we get a lot of people using the trail, I can see a lot more potential desire for use. Often the pavilions that are currently in Stern Park are used at the same time, as well as the gazebo for the weddings and so forth. So I think there's probably a lot more demand to use there than we have access to serve in certain ways right now. So I am trying to keep open mind on all this, but I'm trying to look at other things coming into play too that might want to use more of that space. So just as a comment.
Thank you. Any other council persons want to comment or have questions?
Oh, and then
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I did have one question. So Charlie, why couldn't we have a red light at Bemis now? Not that it would do all the exact same things, but people could stop there and be accommodated in more ways. It's not so difficult for me walking, and when I drive here, I just go an extra block and come over, well, 2 blocks, come over on 1 block, go over on Crocker and turn left there, which it's been my observation that most of the people in the neighborhood, do that, or else they go over to Prince, go on Lake over to Prince and go downtown that way.
Littleton Boulevard was removed from the state highway system several years ago, so we control it. Excuse me. So it can be signalized, but it would only be a 3-way intersection. And the traffic from Bemis doesn't have enough generation of traffic volume in order to warrant a traffic signal. The logical thing is to pick up the traffic coming from the north, the Buck Center Courthouse bus garage, and give the people in that neighborhood another way to get out onto Littleton Boulevard. So since we have an opportunity here to do it. And I'm just presenting the advantages to putting the signal at Court Place / Bemis rather than just at Bemis.
So, Charlie, it could be done at Bemis. Your technical analysis, Mr. Fessler, is would not be the optimum place.
That's right.
To put
Yeah,
it, but
okay.
it could be done.
Okay,
Yes,
that-
ma'am.
that
If-
was my only-
If
It
the
can be
council
done.
made
Yeah.
a decision that was something they preferred, Charlie's just giving you his professional advice with Mr.
Okay,
Fessler.
I just wanted that public.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you, Charlie.
Yes, ma'am.
And if I could just follow up the comments I made regarding the pedestrian crosswalk on Littleton Boulevard. I mean, I've expressed some of my own opinions, but also I've heard that reinforced by the traffic engineers as well as some of the staff members as far as that condition. So I'm just relaying that experience to the group as a whole.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I wasn't around for the discussions that occurred, and I realize it might not have gone to the Planning Commission, but there were some discussions with the neighborhood regarding development here. Maybe some folks that had been present, recognizing it'll be secondhand, could share where the neighborhood might have been before.
With respect to development on the site, I can share some thoughts only from my experience in holding, I think, 3 neighborhood sessions, and there were mixed responses. I think there are a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different questions. I think the one that resonated most often and the loudest was a traffic question. I believe, Charlie, you might be able to support this, but I believe Bemis now is probably not an optimal intersection as it sits. And of course, rightly so, I think citizens raise good questions about if there's a development that takes place on the site, what's going to happen with the traffic? How do they leave the site and how do they get out onto Littleton Boulevard? And most importantly, as those residents who live kind of to the south of our site, back in that area, I think their observations were accurate, and that is that if we don't manage the flow of traffic out of the site onto Littleton Boulevard, then traffic is going to leave the site, go to and use Bemis. It'll get to Bemis, and by force of habit, they'll learn that Bemis is a difficult street to turn left and sometimes right on. As a result of that difficulty, they're going to, instead of going out and going left toward Littleton Boulevard, that they're going to turn right and come back down into our neighborhood. And we would prefer that not to happen. You know, good observations. And I think that as we, as Al and Charlie have worked together to try to put some of the pieces together, I think this intersection addresses that. One of the difficulties that has happened, I think, is in terms of some of the public sessions we've held, it's difficult to know for sure what we can put on the site if we don't solve some of these sort of circumstantial things around it. And we're, I think, from my perspective, we could go a lot of different ways. If we don't do the land swap and I keep the piece that's to the west where the trail would go now, I would develop that and use it, and it becomes part of the project. Obviously, I think whatever we do, we have to solve for where the traffic goes in and out of the site. So to that extent, and as Charlie pointed out, the intersection, I believe, serves a lot of other masters, and it completes a lot of other traffic flow questions that are, helpful to the city. It's kind of a win-win situation because depending on where we locate it, assuming that works for the city, and assuming that traffic then can come out and turn east off of in front of the Buck Center from Court Place, and we also create a pedestrian passage. And Council Member, I appreciate your comments on the passage. I wish I could say the same, because I've had a number of very close calls, near misses, and others have with me going across that street. And the problem being that we were, I think Al went to the Planning Commission, and I was with Al. We talked about this project, and we talked about this idea and what was going on with the ditch trail. And one of the Planning Commission members, I think, cogently pointed out that I think he called that traffic flow coming across the bridge eastbound on Alamo the launch ramp. That's his word. The problem is, on the launch ramp, you can't see pedestrians stepping out into the street. The visibility is blocked, and it creates an inherently dangerous situation, I believe, potentially. And so if they get up there, they have a hard time, they're stepping on the gas, and they're not seeing somebody going across the intersection. So I think the intersection solves the pedestrian usage, which one would hope, thanks to Charlie's efforts, that that would be an intersection that would be used a lot more for traffic and pedestrian flow as well. So all in all, nobody that I heard was saying no. There were questions, there were concerns, as would be appropriate, I think. But there are also a lot of people coming up to me and saying, please take my name. I want to buy a place. I want to live there. And I could, if you want to accept Al's invitation to come to the site, I'll take you up on the top floor of that sort of west red building, and the views are absolutely spectacular. And I have a lot of people that just love the idea of that whole project being developed. But we don't know where to start, as Al said, at this juncture, because there's things that I think are important to sort of nail down before we begin.
So Steve, there's no real positioning other than to say that to some extent, or questions actually for you and Charlie, the intersection issue is separate from the land swap at some level. You're looking for the package because it gives you everything around the particular site, and I understand that, but to some extent the intersection is almost separate at some level in addressing some other issues for this site as well.
Perhaps. I look at the intersection as being inextricably connected to, I don't know if you can parcel off the interest of the intersection being my site or the city's or any. It's I think as Jim introduced this, it's a convergence of interests, and I think it's a win-win situation for everybody. So from that perspective, I think I might say it differently, and I don't know if the words make much difference, but to me, it's kind of like the old mind-body split. Can you really separate them? It's part and parcel of the being, of the organism, and the traffic and everything else. And I think it all, in my view, from my perspective, I think it needs to be addressed collectively.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right, that brings us to item 1B, which is the proposed 2011 special project budget.
Council, this is in response, I think, particularly to a request from Councilman Cernanek, and the rest of the council said, yeah, we want to hear this, and Mr. Cernanek had asked particularly about the the transaction of the water fund when the council made the policy decision to dissolve the water fund, utility fund, transfer those assets into the special projects fund. A little bit of an accounting there. And so you have a memo from me that lays out, and these numbers have been checked by Erlene, so they are 100% correct if you have any questions. So we've tried to give you a little bit of the transaction history, the accounting, to the best of my knowledge, about the waterfront assets, and then the 2011 budget. So we don't know how much in detail the council wants to go into the special projects fund tonight, but we have a lot of staff people here, so I think you have the overview memo, and we have a lot of staff here, so I think we're prepared to respond to any questions that council may have about the proposed 2011 Special Projects Fund.
I have a request.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe could we put on the board the total amount in the special projects fund and the amount that was put in from the water fund, then we know, based on what you've given us, but the public doesn't have it, the amount that has been committed, spent for the police facility. Then, because we have these right now combined, right, in the special projects fund. We have
Well, they're combined to a certain extent, although the police facility has its own line item.
right, but I'm just,
So it has a designated budgeted amount of 5.8 million.
right,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, so that piece is easy. I'm
Yes,
just
ma'am.
wanting to see the total in the special projects fund maybe separate from the amount that was put in there from the water fund. Right, because there's not all that much extra in there now,
No, I guess,
apart from the water fund, right?
well, do you want to, okay, help me out here, Farman. I'm not quite tracking with the question. Do you want to start out with the fund balances for 2010? Because that's the way the accountants...
Probably the beginning of 2010. And maybe nobody else wants to see that. I meant to call today, and I totally forgot, and I thought, it's too late to call when I got home. I mean, somebody was here, but...
Okay. But we could work off the memo. I mean, the fund balance, the proposed fund balance at the end of 2010 is 6 million, I should have it in here someplace.
5 million.
6.1 million.
6102520.
Yeah.
We can put that on the
So
board.
if you go to what page is that on, Mayor?
176.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my book.
Yeah, there you go.
Jim, Tiffany's going to put that on the board, page 176 of the proposed budget. I think
Okay,
that might help people at home.
thank you. I knew Tiffany would come.
That includes
Bail me out.
that incorporates the 1.3 from the state for bowls, doesn't it?
That's
Yes, it
correct.
does.
Okay. And, I'm sorry, I'm waiting
No,
until you get
let's
finished.
go ahead, let's get these numbers up here, Peggy, and then make sure.
Yeah, and-
Maybe I'm just not tracking with you.
And we have some money spent right now on the police facility project, but we don't finish paying for that, right, until the building's finished?
Well, it's, except what the accountants have done, they've expensed it all in 2010.
Oh, okay.
That's a term I picked up from
Okay,
hanging around with them.
that's all right.
So this number, your year-end number assumes, and I maybe inartfully put that in the memo, that the entire police building is already
Okay,
expensed.
and
Yes.
that was one of the questions
Okay.
I was going to ask, so
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
okay.
Okay.
And we're now in, just as a side question, we're now in the middle of October. I'm assuming we know whether or not we were going to need the contingency?
No, ma'am.
We don't know.
We think things are favorable, but I talked to the project manager today. We're on budget, we're within budget, we're on time. They're not ready to yet
Okay,
turn loose of the contingency. I would just say at this point, it at least looks favorable.
okay.
But I don't want to tell you there's absolute money in the bank yet.
Okay, and so numbers that I'd at least like up there is how much we actually transferred in when we did from the water fund,
Yes, ma'am.
and then the whole, and the cost, again, for the viewing people to see,
Yes, ma'am.
the total cost, at least right now, with that contingency for the police facility.
Okay, and Tiffany, you have those numbers? Hopefully, they match up with my numbers in the memo.
Not quite.
It looks pretty close.
Tiffany, you were supposed to work with us on that.
All right, now well, Tiffany, why don't you put the cost of the budget for the police expansions, 5,828,140. So it leaves, if you, in my terminology, if you want to quote the water fund balance of $5,128,138.
So we want that number up on the board too, in case anybody in the room or at home can see them. The water fund balance after we.
Tiffany, the 5,128,138, which assumes that the entire 5,828,140 is expensed.
And I call it H2O, that's just.
So do I.
She took a lot of chemistry classes and did no accounting.
Any more numbers you want up there?
So now I'm trying to make sure that I'm seeing this.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
if we didn't have the water fund and the special projects fund, and this is what I was thinking, have been thinking.
Right.
We would have pretty much no money in the special projects fund. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Not only that, but includes the estimate at year end includes
Right.
1.3 million for the transfer of bowls as well.
Right.
Yeah, you're
So-
correct.
So if we didn't have those two, we'd be at a negative balance.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at paying the lease payments that we've talked about,
Yes, ma'am.
that we've got to pay year to year to year,
Yes, ma'am.
do we have a counterfeit machine we're gonna be using? I'm teasing here a little bit, but, so we
That's
have-
part of the concern,
Yeah,
is we've got at least $1.4 million in ongoing lease payments, ongoing annual lease payments,
yeah,
that we have to come up with probably out of the general fund, because the HUTF basically covers the roadway stuff.
right. Now, when we had the discussion 6-7 months ago about possibly paying off a couple of the lease payments,
Yes, ma'am.
I thought we had money at that point to pay off a couple of those, and yet now we wouldn't have money to pay off what we were talking about.
Well, you had two discussions, and somebody can help me here. One was a refinance, which is a totally different
Right.
decision than a payoff. And I think the only one that we talked about paying off was the courthouse, because the other bonds are
We
not
couldn't call-
callable,
yeah,
I
right.
think, until 20.
I think she's talking about when we first started the water fund, we had talked about taking some of the money, up to $6 million, and doing for the police building, and
And-
taking the remaining portion of that and paying off the courthouse.
Yes, sir.
And I think there's two other lease.
Police radios, I think.
Police radios and the,
Right.
And I think I think we could pay them off right now if you wanted to, but then that would leave us starved for cash.
Right, no, and that's okay. I'm just, unless you have all these things in a computer that you can do a search on, to find all the discussions, and we don't have it really at our disposal quite that way. So I'm just trying to, since this is a study session,
Sure.
I'm trying to get all these different pieces out there for us.
Yeah, because Doug Farman gave us a memo for that during the budget stuff. The payoff of the courthouse cops is 3.5, I think.
and that was prior to the official budget being approved for the police facility addition.
No, I'm sorry, I'm giving you the wrong figure. That's the remaining left to pay.
I thought it was
So,
like 2.4 or something.
yeah, I think you're right.
2.4, 2.5, somewhere in there, right?
But the short answer is, of the remaining $5 million, there's enough to pay off those three, if that's what the council would choose to do. My personal feeling right now is, given our cash position and the article in the newspaper this morning about the less optimistic outlook for the economy in Colorado in the future, that we're better off hanging on to the cash.
Yeah.
And,
But-
I mean, if we paid them off, we would save the 1.4 every year. But,
We'd be,
You can only save the 240,000.
pardon
Yeah,
me?
that's the payments. You-
The 1.4 includes a lot of stuff other than the courthouse.
That includes the.
I'm sorry, you're right, that includes
Yes,
the
sir.
maintenance facility.
Yes,
So
sir.
we would save,
$250,000.
yeah, so you save 300,000 annual.
but you'd be
But you-
short for
Yeah,
emergency.
but you dumped 5 million to do that. And
But if we tried to protect until we had an emergency, so that we could continue to pay, hopefully, for a few years, continue to make payments, because we don't want to just spend and then hope that we
Yes,
get
ma'am.
something coming in to cover payments. So I'm just trying to, thank you for helping me
Sure.
work through that and put numbers on the board.
Well, I've got a couple questions about the special projects, and since Debbie forced us to go through so quickly on that during the budget time,
Blame Debbie, that's right.
I never got a chance to ask these questions.
This is still a work in progress, and some of the projects are being, will still be modified. As you know, particularly like on the streets, even though you appropriate an amount, we don't do projects until we bring actual projects to you. And so some of the numbers will change, but we'll be happy to answer any, as I said in my memo, any specific project that you have questions about. I hope we have enough staff here tonight to respond. So, Mayor?
The EOC generator,
Yes, sir.
that's something that IT is recommending for Station 12 to power the servers
Yes, sir.
in case this building gets crushed and we have to move over there
Yes, sir.
and we lose the power there.
Yes, sir.
But it's not needed for the operation of Station 12.
No, sir.
Okay?
And give us the cost, Doug.
That's 167,000.
Whatever it is.
Page 177.
778.20.
Yeah, 170, oh, you don't have the book. 177 if you've got the book.
Page 177, closer to the bottom.
And then the exterior parking lot is 100 grand for the, and that's this parking lot plus the stuff in there?
No.
Bill, Bill can respond to that.
It's the front parking lot, the old front parking lot that is still there. And, Jim, should I bring up our thoughts on that now?
Sure, that's what we're here for.
You know, knowing that you may be looking at some revenues or taking some of these projects back, cutting them back a little. When I talked to Dave, that 100,000 was to replace the light fixture, the light pole, to rewire those lights and put them in conduit throughout the parking lot. As Charlie will testify, that when they dug up the parking lot for Rio Grande to put the trench through, there was a lot of wires that are for the lighting that is not in conduit and was just laying there. Charlie, being the nice guy that he is, took those wires that were exposed and did put some of them into conduit. Now, from the light pole to where the street is, the
You
cut
mean on
is...
that little stretch that he put the storm sewer in?
Yes, it was nice. I mean, we got some of it done. But anyways, the long story short is, if you're looking for some money, for somewhere between 17 and 18, maybe 20,000, we can replace just the fixtures on top of each pole. That will match and be exactly the same as what is in the new parking lot. So we would forego the poles and the rewiring in the parking lot. So we could get you $80,000 right there.
Well, and the need to do the work had to do with the lighting ordinance, right?
Partly, yes, had to do with that, but also with the new parking lot now and what way it's designed, it would be nice to have them both illuminating the same, but yes, part of it has to do with the lighting ordinance, it does. So that's one place where you could save some money. On that same project, going into the next year, we broke the lighting project out for the city in 3 phases. One was the front parking lot, the next one was what we call the ballards, those little lights that you see along the walkways. They're falling apart, and the parts are getting harder to find to replace those. But we don't have to address that until 2012.
But if we wanted to defer what Phil, in consulting with Dave Stacy, we could defer, we could keep, let's say retain about $83,000
in
in cash.
2011.
Let me just give you one other little piece. If you look up above there, under 34167840, actually it's right under the backup EOC, the traffic light system upgrade. That's the O'Connell light. Charlie, Tim Weaver told us that that's not moving forward. That's $60,000. Please go over there at $60,000.
So here.
Which page are you?
You're on page 177.
Okay.
It's the second on line,
And then
7840-005.
Yes, sir, that project will not go forward. So that money is available for the fund balance, that's $60,000.
I thought, is the Town Hall Arts Center RTU replacement the one that we left in, or the one
Well,
we took out?
What we did was we put one unit in the building maintenance account line item, which we took out when we had to do the additional cut. So that one, there's one
So
unit.
building maintenance is the one that went bye-bye.
Right. This one is a capital project. In hindsight, we probably should have put them both in capital projects.
Okay.
We will not do that again. We're feeling a little bit of a need to keep this one in here. Even though we replaced one with ECBG money, we're feeling a little uncomfortable. You got 3 units up there. 2 are 28 years old. 1 is 24 years old. If we can get 2 replaced, and they would just heat and air condition the theater, we're feeling a lot more comfortable about what we got. We can patch the other one up if we need to be, but I think I told you the last time, the scenario was the gentleman, consultant that came out and said, you know, if you just replace some of the parts on this old unit, it's going to be somewhere around $14,000, $15,000, $16,000, and you might as well buy a new unit. So I'd like to keep that one in there. I'll wait until the next question before I just jump into all my projects.
Well, my next question is on 178, the traffic signal program.
Yes, sir. That project is a proposed replacement of the traffic signal at County Line and Broadway. And we have matching money coming from, we have requested a contribution from Douglas County. You might remember that Douglas County is also contributing to the traffic signal that we just let the bid on at Erickson and County Line, and so this would be the Broadway County Line signal.
You think they'll come through?
Charlie, the question was, what was the prognosis from Douglas County?
They were very cooperative on the Erickson signal. The bid came in very low. We may not even need most of what they contributed, so I'm hopefully asking them to take that money and move it over to the Broadway signal, and I've actually asked for $65,000. I don't know.
I guess my general feeling is we're in a difficult year this year. We are anticipating next year being a difficult year. We went through some pretty extraordinary measures to cut the budget for 2011. I would just as soon conserve as much cash out of the special projects as I can. I mean, if you can save 80 grand by just doing a portion of the lights, if we can defer the EOC generator to a future year, and you know, the 225, if you can get money out of Douglas County, that's great. If you can't, then I'd just as soon defer that. I don't think we have any choice but using the water fund for the lease payments, the combination of lease payments, because we don't have enough cash otherwise. So that's my general direction.
Jim, can I react to the traffic signal comment?
Sure.
That light needs to be replaced. It's the last span wire we have. It has been hit several times by trucks that think they can make it underneath there, and they can't. The mast arms and poles that we would install would raise it high enough in order to pass through all trucks. With the reconstruction work that's going on on Broadway in Douglas County right now, truck traffic is not going to get any less, especially with good access to C-470. They're improving the lanes accessing onto C-470 with that project.
Let me just
It's going to
comment
be
on
a
that.
pay me now or pay me later
Yeah,
situation.
But let me comment on that, because we can put together a complete, some of these projects are not going to go January 1. I mean, we can sit on them, we can defer them, we can wait until if we get some kind of more concrete feedback from Douglas County. We also, and I didn't show it as a revenue here, but we have about $80,000 in the Public Facilities Fund that could be appropriated to this. So we might be able to come to you, again, given your druthers of saying, I'd like to conserve as much special projects cash. We could put it together if we have a combination of Douglas County public facilities money, and then if we might actually even go out to bid. But, we could come to you, but we understand your general direction and concern about conserving cash. So I think what we would do is look at it on a project-by-project basis and then come to you with the specifics of how that worked out and what the cash actual end contribution from special projects would be before we could go forward. So
I mean, if we have to do it, we have to do it. But
yeah, but I think there's other ways. I mean, we would certainly work as hard as we could on our due diligence to minimize the actual cash drawdown from the Special Projects Fund, but then show you what we felt we had to do.
Deb?
I guess I want to just track back to a couple of years ago, or at least a year ago, and, perhaps this is just a big lesson learned for myself. My intention with the water fund money and what was remaining from what we had committed to the police building was never to throw it in a pot and watch it slowly dissipate. And that, I think, is what happened. I understand the situation we're in with the economy. I understand that we've got fund balances that are getting low. We've still got things that have to be paid out of them. We've got a lot of deferred things. We're still deferring things. We're fortunate that we have that money. But I'm actually shocked that $5,128,138 is just right there, one big, in a pot with a bunch of other money that's just slowly being pulled out for various projects. I think it's a disservice to what the intention of that money was. We were very, very, very careful when we made our decisions about what we were going to do with that money, because we had a number of citizens come down and talk to us about that and their concerns. And there's still issues in the community about that money.
I guess
they think their rights were to it.
Councilman Brinkman, I'm not tracking with that because I'm not sure. I distinctly recall that we talked about the need to make those lease payments. That has been a theme in every budget
I'm not
session
saying we
for a
didn't
number
talk
of
about it. I'm saying we didn't do it.
Well, all right. Well, then I guess.
We didn't do it.
Well, but where we're faced today, I don't think anybody on council, and that was a year and a half ago?
Yes, sir.
I don't think anybody on council had the intention of using the water fund for, I'll call general operation expenses. But that was a year and a half ago. And I think we're at basically an economic point where we don't have any choice. I think we should minimize as much as possible the amount of water fund that we do and conserving cash on some of these projects is one way of doing that. One of the ways of looking at this is when we get done at the end of 2011, we'd have $3,400,000 of water fund money left and zero money of non-water fund money in the special projects. And then we can decide in 2011 what to do about it. That's one way of looking at it.
And I guess maybe when Councilman Bregman says you did not decide, I guess, quite frankly, I have to take exception to the disservice, because if that was the intent, I don't recall the council ever saying to the staff, what would the water fund be used for? I mean, the discussion, the framework that I heard was the police building, but then there was a policy decision to put it in special projects. The discussions I had with citizens was that it was not going to go for general operations. It was going to go to special projects. So maybe my memory's a little different from yours, but I do not accept the disservice label. If council wants to do some other things with this, certainly that's your prerogative. It still is not. It eludes me then as to what if you're not going to use it for lease payments and special projects, I've not heard any articulation as to what the special projects money is supposed to be used for. So maybe that's a discussion we need to have, some clarification before we get too far into it.
I think we're kind of getting into a little bit of semantics, and I contributed to this because special projects isn't operations, it's all capital stuff.
Yes, sir.
So I think what we had envisioned would happen with the water fund a year and a half ago is no longer possible now. And because we can't continue to function unless we spend some of that water fund on items that are in the special projects fund, or we're not doing all sorts of things. So I don't see that we have an alternative to do that. I'm not happy with the alternative, but I think it's the best of the unhappy alternatives that are in front of us. We can't not make the lease payments. We could stop paving roads, but I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do. And frankly, if I had to stand up in front of the citizens and say, we made the decision to not pave the roads so that we could save this cash, I'm not sure that I could make that argument on why that was a good decision either. So, we started out a year and a half ago saying we were going to take the water fund, we were going to spend it on the police building, we were going to pay down debts, and then we're going to have a little bit left. But we decided to not pay down the debts, or conversely, we didn't decide to pay down the debts deliberately.
Part of it because we couldn't.
Well, part of it because we got worried about the cash, and John was the champion of you need to hold on to that cash, and he was right. So when it came time to look at that, and Jose was one of the champions of paying off the loans, when it came time to make that decision, we didn't make the decision. And the reason we didn't make the decision is because we were getting concerned about keeping the cash. So we are at the position now where we have the cash. We need the cash. It's not what we wanted to spend the cash on, but that's where we are.
Well, and can I just clarify? That's how I recall it also. There was not a decision made that that money was going to be spent. The decision made was that money was going to be saved, so that if we needed it, we would have that.
Well, but I think what you have in front of you is a budget.
That's not, I know, you're jumping ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so a year and a half ago, fine, that is exactly what I understood. And I guess, and again, it comes back to my own lesson learned on this. If Phil hadn't asked for this study session, when would we know and where would we know, where the water fund money went? I mean, breaking it down and seeing where it went, and seeing that it was in there, and that's the same thing we ask during the budget thing. The $1.3 million from the state is going to go in there for bowls. So, and we talked about flagging things at that point, and flagging the $100,000 from the Tabor money that was approved by the voters to spend on the fire thing that isn't going to happen. I mean, those are some accountability things that I feel I have an accountability to that money as we designated it in specific ways. And I just like to see where that's at. And if we need to spend that, I'm not griping about having to spend this on paying things that need to be paid. We're very fortunate we have that money and we can do that. But just an accounting of that and
Well, we can set up as
clear
many,
understanding of the funds and the money that four of us want to see flagged as budgets come through, as expenses come through, as bids and estimates come through.
we can set up as many sub-accounts as you want. I mean, if you want to have it all flagged, and so that we have sub-accounts that show this was the proceeds from the water fund, we can do that.
I think that's what we're talking about, something like what we did with Tabor Access, just so that we can tell the citizens 2 or 3 years from now, yeah, we had $11 million, we spent $5 million or $6
Tiffany
million.
and Earlene can set up as many sub-accounts as you want. They, in fact, they enjoy the work. From nodding off.
Bruce, and then Phil.
To a certain extent, I mean, we're sort of, we could put it all back. You could put the $1 million for, I guess the question I wanted to ask, I guess, before the water fund got transferred, I assume this stuff was being paid out of general fund.
Yes, sir.
Transfer. So, I mean, technically what we could do at some point is say if we really want the 5-1 to be flagged as water fund rainy day capital projects as
Yes,
opposed
sir.
to water fund special projects,
You could do that.
then all we'd be doing is drawing down the general fund reserve so that it's no longer, 9.7%. It's probably closer again to 6 or 7% instead of so it's sort of a scale. I mean, one's going to go up and the other's going to go down.
It all depends on where you keep your fund balance.
Exactly. At this
That's
stage,
right. We could bring those options.
And we actually had that discussion a year ago at the budget, a year ago, when we talked about moving the money from the water fund into the special projects and how much to move and how much you wanted as a reserve in the special projects fund. I mean, all of that was part of a conversation. You two guys weren't here at the time, but that all of that was a conversation that the council had previously. So
the only caveat, of course, is if we want the 5-1 to stay at 5-1 and it comes back out of the general fund, then the question ends up being, is there a follow-on step where we go back around the horn in terms of pushing that reserve balance back up a little bit more in the general fund with further cuts?
And you can certainly, that's your prerogative, if you want to go through that exercise. Yes,
No, I understand, but the whole thing is connected as I
Yes,
see
sir.
it. Okay.
Absolutely.
I would see some of this, perhaps the audit subcommittee that's going to do the GASB 54, right?
That's
GASB
right.
54.
That's right.
And the
Governmental Accounting Standards Board.
and the city council financial policies, and we're meeting in early November, so it seems to me we might discuss some of that and bring recommendation back to council on this.
Do you see a connection between that, Mr. Farman? I think isn't this a budget presentation issue?
Well, there is a little bit of a connection because we will be discussing proposed reserve policies for possibly the general fund or any other fund. So
it may, from a policy point of view.
From a policy
Well, I'm
perspective.
taking then from tonight, from this discussion, before we bring this to you for final adoption in November the 16th, we're going to go back, we're going to break down sub-accounts. We will account for every penny of the water fund and show it in a sub-account, and we will show exactly where it's being distributed before you see it for adoption on November 16th.
yeah, and if you do that as like a separate page, because that's how I remember we did it for Tabor, is we had a
Yes, sir.
spreadsheet that showed Tabor coming in and then what we spent it.
Absolutely, easy to
And
do.
that way we can tell people this is what happened with the water fund.
All right.
But I've been proposing a couple financial changes, and let me make that in the form of a motion so we know we really have a decision.
Boy, did I get to have a chance to
I'm sorry.
discuss first?
I'm sorry. Yes, you're up back. You're up to bat.
And just to, kind of let everyone know, there's also kind of a transfers going in and out that are there. I mean, if you actually look at the change in fund balance for 2009, and you go back that far, you could actually make a claim that 2.1 million of the water fund, if that was the excess, was spent in 2009, if you go back, because the transfer in was at 10.9 and the fund balance only showed a positive of 8.8, and so you could say, hey, we were already spending some of it in 2009, whether it was conscious or not. That would be one of the things, and so if you added the 2.1.
No, actually we had over 13 million in fund balance in 2009.
Special fund?
If you look at page 176 of the budget book.
No,
You're partially right, because, and this is something also that happened last year, is we had interest money.
Yeah, well, let me address Doug's piece, okay? What we had was we had a 10.9 million transfer in, okay?
Right.
And there was only a net change, okay? I realize you're looking at the fund balance, but the net change after the 10.9 in was only 8.9 positive. So there was a 2.1 spend down of the fund balance in 2009.
We're having.
Do you see what I'm saying, Doug?
I think I'm almost there.
Okay.
I'd have to study it a little bit
on the
more,
revenue
but
side.
We did transfer that money in October of 2009, so I'm not sure.
But I'm looking at it as a chunk of a year. You had a 10.9 balance in, but net for the year it was only 8.8 positive after that 10.9 in. So there was a 2.1 million spend down in 2009 of the fund balance. I realize the fund balance was more than the water fund total at the end of the year, but absent the water fund transfer in, there was a 2.1 million spend down.
Okay, I'll have to respectfully disagree, because I do have an accounting for that.
Tiffany, come up to the mic.
Yeah.
For the TV people, Tiffany Hooten, our...
I mean, then you have to explain it a little bit differently, because...
Sure, and maybe Tiffany already has the answer, I'm not sure.
Well, I don't, we transferred the money on December 31, 2009, the 11 million, rounded up. We already had 4 million in beginning fund balance. We knew we were going to spend about 2 million of that by the end of the year, which gets you to about your 13 million at the end of 2009. So I agree with Doug. I don't understand that we've spent any water fund money in 2009.
Okay. Then there was an intentional 2.1 spend down of fund balance and special projects in 2009, in addition to what we had budgeted in the 2009 general fund?
Probably most of this stuff.
Well, perhaps, maybe the best way of addressing this is the audit committee is going to meet in a couple weeks. Finance staff can propose the spreadsheet of what happens with the water fund. We can look at that and then bring that back to council as part of the November, is it 2nd or 4th that we're doing?
November 2nd is your first reading, November 16th is your public hearing.
And bring that back as that. Does that sound okay to everybody? Phil?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the numbers on a year by year. I don't have the dates within that, but it was, because in this report it doesn't show what the 2009 budget was. And so it's trying to understand that. Because I was just trying to say, we might actually end the year, if you look at it as 2.1 million was spent in 2009, 5.8 million spent in 2010 on the police facility, that we might have the water fund left. Now, that means that we spent the 1.3 million transfer from the state that I don't think we've received yet.
It hadn't come in yet, had it?
It has come in.
Now, but not in 09.
No.
Not in 2009, no, we recently received
Came in
that.
2010. Yeah, okay. And one of the things that I wanted to ask is just so that we can understand it, because it's the changes in the special projects fund are both expenditures as well as revenue. Since the revenue list is a little bit shorter, just trying to understand some of the differences from the 2010 budget to the 2011 budget, showing a reduction in amounts from Arapahoe County as well as a reduction in the building use tax, and to ask for some particular comments on those, as well as any of the others that someone would maybe chime in on.
And the reduction in the Arapahoe County is, but they made a contribution, a one-time contribution to the Rio Grande project. And the reduction in the use tax is just being that's a very conservative estimate for what the building activity will be in 2011.
Oh, we had Alexan to account for, too.
I'm sorry?
The Alexan development gave us a lot of use tax.
Alexan is, that building use tax is that they're actually going to pay that on a monthly basis. So we will receive that over probably a year to 18-month period.
I think, the Alexon was paid in 2009.
Not the building.
You're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking
the
Alta
Aspen
Vista.
Grove.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Vista, yes.
I keep confusing the two, yes.
And you're right, that's going to be about $500,000 in use tax.
Right.
Between now and the end of next year.
Right.
That is not budgeted for in 2011.
Right, and I guess I'll repeat my mantra that the numbers that you see in the budget will not be the same numbers that you will see on December 31st, 2011. As we've already said, Dr. Cole's already alluded to, and I deliberately pointed out in my council communication that we have $500,000 in the contingency fund in the police building. And in fact, right now, I think our numbers for 2010 on building use tax we may even still make our numbers, even though the year-end numbers say we're going to be down. So it is a very conservative outlook, Mr. Cernanek, and so we would hope that these would be worst case, but we planned on it being a very gloomy year. If it gets a little better, the numbers will not look this gloomy.
Thank you. I'm trying to look at all of it.
Yes, sir. Good questions.
Okay, Doug, you want to make your...
Yeah, let's try and formalize this. I move that we remove the $167,000 for the EOC generator and reduce the $100,000 for the exterior parking lights to $18,000 from the special projects.
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
And that just leaves it into a fund balance is all that's doing.
Yes.
Instead of spending.
Yeah, that's just basically saving the cash. Or if you were to look at the memo on what we're, special projects memo, that's here amongst all the other memo. Thank you. What Jim said is we've got $1.4 million of lease payments and $281,000 above that we're projecting to take out of the water fund. This would get us 82, right?
Right. Well,
You get 247,000 of it.
Right.
So 247,
Yes,
which is
sir.
pretty close.
And if we pick up the 80,000 from the
County.
Public Facilities Fund, I think we'll even end up with a net to what I'm calling the water fund proceeds. So we'll show that to you when we bring it back on November 2.
Doug, and then Bruce.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Coogan and her team also spotted a double budgeting as far as the radar replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And they can eliminate the $24,200 because they have a $10,000 radar replacement program already in the general fund.
Okay.
And so we can eliminate that $24,200 out of this fund.
You can also do that 60,000 in the traffic system upgrade that you talked about earlier?
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
60,000.
60,000, yes, sir. We already netted that out, so we're already on the plus side.
Okay.
331.
Can I move to amend your comment to, or your motion to include the 60,000 and 24.2 just mentioned?
Okay.
Second it.
Somebody else got it first. Okay.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Okay. So that motion is to amend my motion to take out the 60,000 for the traffic and the 24,000 for the radar replacement. Okay, discussion on the amendments. All in favor, raise your hands. I'll love it when it's unanimous, it's easier. It's 7-0. This brings us back to the main amended motion, which is to remove the $167,000 from the EOC generator, to reduce the lighting from $100,000 to $18,000, to remove the $60,000 from the traffic signal and $24,000 from the radar. Bruce?
Just a quick clarification again. I caught the earlier comment about the EOC generator, but this is not a mission-critical issue. This is we'd like to have it, but we can get around it.
This is, we will be at some risk. It's not mission-critical, but we will be at some risk, yes.
Okay.
Because if we have to relocate the EOC from this building up to that building, and there's a power outage there, we have no way to power the EOC. Can it wait? Yes.
Okay.
Further discussion? All in favor of the amended motion, raise your hands. That's also unanimous. Okay, that gets us done with that budget item. Anything else?
No, sir.
And we're, Peggy?
I have a question.
Sure.
I know we have two budget readings for the 2011 budget, and given the article that Doug mentioned in the paper today about the gloomier outlook, if any one of us wanted to suggest trimming a little bit more out of the 2011 general fund, would we do it at the first reading or preferably wait to the second reading?
I think we'd like to have direction at the first reading so that we could amend the budget for your final ordinance.
Okay, I'm not sure, if I'm going
It's a
to...
very good question, and if you're feeling like you want to be more conservative and you've got items you'd like to cut and add on there, I think we'd prefer it at November 2 at the first reading, so that then we could prepare the actual appropriations ordinance and bring it back for your public hearing, and then you'd make your decision.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that brings us to our next item, and we're actually 10 minutes early, which is the executive session for the city manager's annual review. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it.
Do we need a motion on this?
We do. Would you please, Bill?
I move that the city council convene an executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, paren 4, paren F, to discuss a personnel matter, which is the city manager's evaluation, and that it include only the council initially.
And then the city manager.
And then the city manager.
Okay. Bruce seconds it. Discussion. Takes 5 votes. All in favor, raise your hands. It's unanimous.
Jose, I thought you'd vote no.
He said we can go to 10 o'clock.
Oh. Did Wendy call you? I wasn't sure what room she set up for you.
She set it up for the city manager's conference room.
Okay.
And I have instructions on how to run the machine.
All right.
I think we all want to meet by ourselves first and then call you in. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So are you going upstairs?
Yeah.
Okay, so you need a key to let you in?
Please.
And do you want to make the statement, we're not going to come back?
When we come back, we will conduct no more business.